Down in Matthew 14, verse number 22.
All right.
Matthew 14, verse 22. In the King James Version, it reads like this.
Very good.
And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship
Yeah.
and to go before him unto the other side while he sent the multitudes away.
Uh-huh.
And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary.
Contrary.
And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit. And they cried out for fear.
Uh-huh.
But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid.
Not afraid.
And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water.
Uh-huh.
And he said, Come.
Come.
When Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus.
Lord.
But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me.
Let's see.
And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were coming to the ship, the wind ceased. I want to talk about this morning, when doing what Jesus says still gets you in trouble. When doing what Jesus said still gets you in trouble.
Get out. Yes, sir.
Now, my statement, brothers and sisters, on this morning would appear to be a matter of subjection,
Yeah.
a fallacy, if you will. It doesn't seem logical in the mind, and I know that there is someone present in this gathering that is wondering, what is he talking about? How is it that you can get in trouble for doing what Jesus says? I never heard such a thing. This little dude here, he was been doing all right up at the night. He must have lost his mind talking about doing what Jesus says and still get in trouble. But ladies and gentlemen, I will emphatically stand up on my statement because I believe that I can back it up with the word of the living God. But prior to dealing with the text for this moment, let me take you to the Old Testament to see a similar situation with the same results, getting in trouble for doing what God says. In Exodus 20, verses 1 through 5, it says it like this, And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. Y'all remember that one. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generations of them that hate me. Then we fast forward over to the book of Daniel, and then we find the Hebrew boys down in Babylon in a despicable situation. They are following the words of God, yet they find themselves in a terrible predicament. They are standing in the presence of a king named Nebuchadnezzar. The king Nebuchadnezzar was a vain, egotistical maniac who was more focused on himself than anyone else.
Yes, sir.
The king has made him a golden image. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon, and he sends a notice out to the hierarchy, the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, and all the rulers in the land, to come and attend his dedication of his image ceremony. The king makes a decree that when they heard the music, that all in the land would have to bow down. Y'all remember you can't bow down. They made a decree that all in the land, when they heard the music, would bow down before the image and worship it. There was a provision made in Daniel 3 and 6. It says, and whosoever falleth not down and worship shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. The signal went out, the music began to play, and all the land fell down to worship. Yet there is a problem. Some noisy, rotten, busybodies noted that there was some Jews in the crowd whom the king had set up over the providences of the land and the affairs of the people in the kingdom, named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and that they did not regard the king, but they failed to bow down and worship his image. They ran to the king and played on his ego and said, listen, king, you have some in your kingdom, in your palace, in your providence, who when the music sounded, king, they did not bow down and worship. The king, in his fury and his rage, summons them and says, what does this mean? You worship in my palace, you live amongst my people, you're ruling in my rule, and yet you do not regard my God, and you did not bow down. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I'm going to give you another opportunity. When you hear the music sound, you will bow down. But wait a minute, y'all. They cannot bow down. These are Jewish boys. They've been raised in Egypt land. They are servants of the eternal God, the God that spoke to us earlier in Exodus 20, that says, you shall not have any other gods before me, and that you shall not bow down to any gods, any images in the land, under the sea, under the sea. You cannot bow down. And these boys been raised under that authority of God.
Yeah.
And the king says, when you hear my music, you will bow.
That's what it says, sir.
But God says, you cannot bow down. God says to them, watch this, y'all, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. He made a golden image and set it up in the plain of Dura. He went on to say, that or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or in the earth below, and that in the water beneath it, thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord, am a jealous God. And now the king has made him an image, sent out a decree, and said, when you hear the music, you will bow down. But these boys can't bow because God has spoken. And because they did not do what the king said, but follow the word of God, it got them in trouble.
Doing what Jesus said.
They got in trouble for doing what God said. The king said, all right, I'm going to give you one more chance. Y'all know the story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, king, we're not careful concerning the answer thee in this matter. For the God that we serve is able to deliver us out of your hands and your fiery furnace. But king, let the record be checked out. Even if he don't, we know that he able. We not going to bow. We not going to be, and we not going to serve your golden image, neither your God, because the God that we serve, he's able. And that's what you need to understand this morning, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen. No matter what you're going through, your God is able. No matter what you're dealing with, no matter what's knocked you over, your God is able. No matter what is afflicting you, what is affirming against you, your God is able. In the midst of your situations, when you're backed up in the corner of life, you can still declare, even if he don't fix it, I know that he can. Some of us came in here limping and hurting and in pain, but even if he don't take it away, I know that he can. God, you don't have to, because you didn't take away Paul's thorn in the flesh, and this just might be my thorn. But whatever it is, God, I know that you are able.
Lord have mercy.
Let the record reflect. We will not bow. Notice these boys said to the king, we don't need another chance. We don't need a do-over.
Yeah.
We don't need you to violate your standards, king, but we will not bow. Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer you concerning this matter because we on record with the God who made the heavens and the earth. Y'all don't know when to shout. See, sometimes, brothers and sisters, your faith is going to be called into question. Sometimes you have to make a stand for what you believe in. Sometimes what you believe in is going to get called to the table of cross-examination. And you're going to have to either make a decision. You'll either compromise or you'll stand strong in your faith. What I like about it is the boys knew their upbringing and said, listen, king, we're not going to bow. We can't. God spoke it. We can't. See, sometimes when you know that God has said it, you can't compromise it because God has said it. When God says that he has plans for you to prosper and to be in health, you need to just accept what God says and move on. Did what God told them and wound up in the fiery furnace.
Trouble.
But what I like about this is, y'all, is that what God told them, they got in trouble and wound up in the furnace. But when you do what God tells you to do, and you wind up in trouble for doing what God told you to do, you got to follow this story and find out what happens when a child of God gets in trouble for doing what God said. Wait a minute. They're cast into the burning fiery furnace, and they threw 3 in, but kept King Nebuchadnezzar ran down to the mouth of the fiery furnace. He looked in, but what he saw was mind mesmerizing. And he asked the question, did we not throw 3 in? They said, yes, it's a true, O king. He said, wait a minute, because there's 4 in there now, and the 4th one look like this. Wait a minute, because if you do what God say do, and wind up in trouble for doing what God say do, God may not get you out, but he know how to come join you in it. And that's what I love about this story. God came down into the fiery furnace with them. Sometimes we want God to take us out, but sometimes God want to come get us. God want to come in, but we want to get in. They did what God told them and wound up in the fiery furnace. And so it is in the story before us today. Jesus has just finished feeding the 5,000. Now he sends the disciples and the people away, that he might go up into the mountain to pray to his Father. And he told the disciples to get into a ship and go before him unto the other side while he sends the multitude away. When the multitude departs him, Jesus goes up into the mountain to pray. And he looks out in the 4th watch of the night between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. It's dark, y'all. He looks out. Wait a minute. He's up in a mountain. They're out in the midst of the sea. But he looks out and sees them in a storm. Wait a minute, y'all. That's good news because, listen, sometimes God may not appear that he's with you, but he's still watching. Y'all don't know when they shout. He was not with them, but he was still watching them. And sometimes God will tell you to do something, and your obedience will make you do what God says. But when you're doing what God says, you wind up in a storm. Sometimes you feel like you're going through this thing by yourself, but God ain't left you alone. His eye is on the sparrow. He's still watching over you. And while these boys have rolled out into the midst of a storm, Jesus is still watching. Jesus lets them make it to the midst of the sea. Because sometimes we want God to come get us when the winds start blowing. But wait a minute, sometimes God don't want to get you when the winds start because he needs the storm to get bad enough so you'll realize I can't handle it and call him to the rescue. See, sometimes that's the kind of God he is. He's a rescuing God. He's a redeeming God. He's a delivering God. And sometimes he'll wait right good till you call on his name. He doesn't move until they're stuck in a situation that is above their ability. But when he sees them above their ability, y'all know we've been told all of our upbringing, he won't put on you no more than you can bear. And they're in the storm and now they can't bear it. And that's when Jesus started walking across the water to take care of the situation. Wait a minute, y'all. See, this is the part that I love about this story. He did not let their circumstances drown them. He came before it got to that point. Sometimes God will allow you to go through some things, but come rescue you before it drowns you. Sometimes God will let you start to be in a storm and the ship is taking on water, but before it sinks, he'll show up to get you. They're out in the midst of the storm. And in this text, I see two situations of trouble for obedience, which lets me know that you can do what he says and still get in trouble. In verse 22, the Lord told them to go over to the other side. And out of obedience unto the Lord, they did just what he said. But while they're being obedient, they ran into trouble, a violent storm. And in this instance, they were under the Lord's direction. They were following the directions given, yet they ran into trouble. The second instance I see is in trouble in the storm, following the Lord's direction, is when the disciples saw him walking on the sea. The Bible says they were troubled, saying it's a spirit, and they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, be of good cheer. It is I. Be not afraid. He spoke in terms that they were familiar with. He spoke in terms they were familiar with to calm them in the midst of this opportunity, because the Bible says they're troubled. But they thought it was a ghost. So he had to relieve them of their anxiety by speaking to them in a way they would know who it is. Wait a minute, do y'all remember what John said in 10? My sheep know my voice. And another day, when he spoke to them in familiar terms, Peter, loudmouth Peter, recognized his voice and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come unto thee on the water. See, Peter knew his voice. And when he said, be not afraid, Peter recognized, Lord, if that's really you, bid me to come out here to you on the water. Peter makes a request. Bid me to come. Jesus says, come. When Peter steps out there on the water, there is some trouble waiting on him. There is some great speculation as to why Peter said this. One theologian says because Peter was trying to escape the danger in the ship. Verse 24 says, but the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the winds were contrary. It was strong and violent, blowing in unpredictable ways. So Peter was looking for a way out. Bid me to come. Secondly, Peter said what he said to the Lord because after witnessing all that the Lord had done in their midst, some believe he trusted the Lord enough to keep him safe, even in this storm. The Lord knew that they were fearful, and Peter was trying to escape fate by going to Jesus. But what Peter didn't really understand is that what he was finna do was finna get him in trouble. Watch Peter get in trouble, y'all. Peter said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto you on the water. The Lord said, come. When Peter followed those instructions, he found himself in trouble because the wind was boisterous and he was afraid, beginning to sink. When he took his eyes off Jesus, he wanted to escape the trouble in the boat and found trouble in the water. But he came on the water because Jesus said, come. And when he yielded to the Lord's instruction, trouble came his way. How many of us sometimes been in a situation, want to escape the situation, but got ourselves in a worse situation? Because see, sometimes you got to remain where God puts you until God delivers you out of where he puts you. Because if you move too fast, you're going to run into some adversity that you didn't calculate and God didn't promise. You might be wondering, Reverend, if you are going to get in trouble for following the Lord's words, then why would anybody obey him just to get in trouble? And that is a good question, ladies and gentlemen, but it comes from a silly means. The reason why you still follow the Lord's instructions is because of one more thing in the text that I haven't told you yet. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego discovered it in the furnace. The disciples and Peter discovered it on the boisterous sea. And that is that when you obey God, God will deliver you for your obedience. And I know that's good news this morning. The Hebrew boys was in the furnace. They were right down in the midst of the furnace. The furnace keeper was told to heat the furnace 7 times hotter than it ever was. The flames in this furnace was so hot that the flames were leaping out of the furnace and it devoured the guards that was escorting them to throw them in. The flame is so hot that those that would have thrown them in is consumed by the heat of the furnace because it's 7 times hotter than it ever was. But watch this story, y'all, because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego now have nobody to put them in the furnace because the guards were consumed by the fire. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have made an appointment with the king about the trouble that they're in, and they've got to go into the furnace even though there's nobody there to put them in. Do y'all remember the conversation that they had? King, we're not careful concerning the answer thee about this matter, for the God that we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace, and if we don't get in the furnace, then he ain't able to deliver us. We got to go in, King, even though we don't want to, because sometimes you got to go through some things to prove that God is God and he'll do what he said. Say, the God that we serve, King, he's able to deliver us out of your hands and this furnace. But if he don't, we know he able. Right there, they got to get in the furnace. Climb into the furnace. Walking around in the midst of the furnace. 7 times hotter than it ever had been. Flames are so hot, it killed those outside the furnace. But they didn't even burn the ones in the furnace. It killed those outside the furnace. But it didn't even singe the hairs on the bodies of those in the furnace. Because when obedience of God puts you in the fire, God will insulate you from the fire that you get in for obedience. When the storm winds blow on you because you did what he said, God can still speak peace to the winds and stop them from blowing. When sickness invades your body and you doing what God told you to do, God is still able to speak a word to your sickness. No matter what it is that you're dealing with, the God that we serve is still able to bring you out all right. And I know I'm right about it. In our chosen text for this morning, Christ wanted his disciples to begin learning one of the most important lessons of their lives. His presence would always be with them. Not necessarily his physical presence, but his spiritual presence would be with them always. What they needed was great trust in him. It is the Lord's presence that makes all the difference in your situation. Watch this, y'all. Christ's presence is assured by personal preparation of prayer in verses 22 and 23. Christ's presence conquers fear in verses 24 and 27. Christ's presence stirs the hopes of being saved in verses 28 through 31. Christ's presence conquers nature in verse 32. But then Christ's presence stirs a confession and worship in Matthew verse 33. The disciples was in the midst of the sea. In the midst is they too far from shore, but they're not yet at their destination. They're right in the midst. They are closer to the other side than they are from their starting point. They are in the midst. They're right in the middle. But right in the middle, ladies and gentlemen, is where you will find the Lord your God. They were in the middle of the sea. They were far from the peaceful shores. It felt like they were sinking, never to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard their despairing cry, and from the waters he lifted Peter, and now Peter is safely right. Yet the Lord looked out and came to see about them. Peter was walking in the midst of the sea, took his eyes off Jesus and began to sink. But right in the middle of his fall, he cried unto the Lord and said, Lord, save me. Right in the middle, and that's good news this morning for somebody who's present today, who finds themselves trying to be your best for God, but you keep on falling short. But God is right in the middle. You're trying to do the best you can, and you're still struggling. But don't give up, because God is in your middle. It's good news to somebody whose life ain't treating you fair. But don't throw in the towel, because God is right in your middle. When you need him the most, he's available to you. And that's good news for somebody who's been listening to a voice of the Lord. You will wind up in trouble, because when you do what the Lord say do, then the Lord will take care of, he'll take care of you. And I know I'm right about it. He took care of the Hebrew boys in the furnace. He took care of the disciples in the ship. He took care of Peter walking on the water. Because in each of these situations, they took place because the Lord had said so. And when the Lord tells you something, you ought to act upon it right now. It will befall God to bring it to pass. Oh, ain't that good news? I got one more thing that I want to tell you, and then I'm gone. The Hebrew boys did what he said, and he came in the midst of the furnace. The disciples did what he said, and he came in the midst of the sea. Peter did just what he said, and he came in the midst of his walk. But I remember out on Calvary, Jesus came and stood right in the middle. He stood in the middle of God and man, in the middle of sin and hell. He stood in the middle of salvation and damnation. He stood in the middle of time and eternity, in the middle of love and hate. I tell you that Jesus, he stood in the middle out of a lonely hill called Calvary. But not only did Jesus stand in the middle, he also hung in the middle. He hung in the middle of two thieves. Right in the middle did he hang for me. He hung in the middle of sin and salvation. He hung in the middle of deliverance and degradation. Jesus hung in the middle of our past and our destiny. And that's good news, y'all. So the next time you obey the Lord's voice and be obedient to Jesus and do just what the Lord says and find yourself in trouble, remember that Jesus is standing right by. He's right by your side in the middle of your situation. How do you know, Reverend? Because Matthew 28:20 says, and lo, I'm with you always, even unto the end of the world. Hebrews 13:5 tells me, for he has said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. And I'm banking on it. I'm standing on his word. When I get in trouble, going through the storm and the rain, getting knocked down and stepped on, I choose to remember that I'm more than a conqueror through him that loves me, that all things work together for the good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose, that nothing, no one, no situation shall be able to separate me from the love of my God. And that I'm a joint heir to the throne, that all things will work out all right on my behalf, because Jesus is right in my middle. And I know that God is right in the middle, because I can feel him every now and then. Can I get a witness in here that you can feel God every now and then? I can see him in the arena of my affairs. I can count on him to keep his word. Is there anybody up in here that has ever done what the Lord said and got in trouble? Is there anybody here, y'all, that done what God said and you got in trouble? Well, maybe not you, but that's the way my story is. A time or two, I was trying to live right, but the devil wouldn't let me, and I found myself in trouble. I was paying the tithes and trying to live right, but the devil kept on afflicting my life, and I found myself, I had paid my tithes to the Lord, but I found myself in trouble. But God knows how to step in on time. I got to go this morning, but what I'm going to tell y'all is on this morning, Jesus out on Calvary, he hung in the middle for you and I. And no matter what you're going through, God got you for being obedient to his will. How do you know? Because he went to Calvary to pay for your sin and mine. And what I like about it is that they tell me that in the Bible they hung him high, they stretched him wide, he dropped his head, and then he died. But I got good news for you. When he died, his death certificate became our birth certificate, because when he died, we were born again. Y'all don't know what this happened. His death certificate became my birth certificate, because when he died so that you and I could live. And God's got good news for you. When you do what God says, God will always take care of you. That's what I know about it. That's what I think to tell somebody. You keep on serving. You keep on trusting. You keep on believing. You keep on doing what God say do. And if trouble come your way, just remember, he that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. He met the disciples out on the sea. He met Peter in the midst of his fall. And can I declare to y'all, he'll meet you right where you are. Good evening this morning. I got to leave y'all. Farewell and goodbye. I'm gone, y'all. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Bless the name of the Lord. Be obedient, and God will bring